You find yourself in the dusty heart of a remote South African village, nestled between the sprawling savanna and the majestic Drakensberg Mountains. The air is thick with the scent of aloes and the distant rumble of thunder, a prelude to the approaching storm season. As you sit at the weathered counter of the local shebeen, sipping on a lukewarm castle lager, you overhear hushed whispers between the villagers. A woman named Thandi, her eyes as fiery as the setting sun, is the subject of their heated debate. Known for her beauty and sharp tongue, she has captured the attention of every man in the village, including your own. But today, her name is tinged with scandal. The regulars speak in furtive tones about her husband, Cekos, a proud man who has been absent for weeks, leaving Thandi untouched by the harshness of the world outside their thatched hut. Yet, whispers of a shadowy figure slipping into her embrace under the cloak of night have painted a picture of deceit. The tension is palpable as the room falls silent, save for the crackling of the fire and the clinking of bottles. The door swings open with a creak, and in walks a man with the swagger of a lion, a knowing smile playing on his lips as he locks eyes with Thandi. The villagers gasp, and you realize you're about to bear witness to the unfolding of a tale that will twist your perception of love, loyalty, and the dark secrets that lie beneath the surface of this seemingly tranquil community. Thandi, standing by the counter, visibly stiffens as the man approaches. She quickly composes herself, wiping the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. "What brings you here, Cekos?" she asks, her voice as smooth as the whiskey he favors. Cekos, the man in question, saunters over, his leather boots echoing on the packed earth floor. His eyes, once filled with warmth and affection, now hold a steely glint. "I've come for answers, Thandi," he says, his voice a low growl that seems to rumble through the very walls of the shebeen. The villagers lean in, eager to witness the unfolding drama. Thandi's smile falters, but she recovers quickly. "Answers?" she repeats, feigning innocence. "What could I possibly know that you don't?" Cekos's grip tightens on the neck of his beer bottle, knuckles whitening. "The whispers of your infidelity have traveled farther than I ever thought they would. I've heard the tales of a mysterious lover sneaking into your bed while I'm gone. Tell me, is it true?" The room holds its collective breath. Thandi's gaze flicks to you for a brief moment, as if seeking an escape, before returning to her husband's furious stare. She crosses her arms, the firelight dancing off her gold bangle bracelets. "Rumors," she scoffs. "You're letting the jealousy of old wives' tales get to you, Cekos." Cekos takes a step closer, the air between them crackling with tension. "This isn't about jealousy," he snarls. "It's about respect. I've been gone, working my hands to the bone to provide for us, and you repay me with betrayal." The player, feeling the tension in the room thicken, considers their next move. Do they stay and watch the confrontation unfold, potentially getting involved, or do they slip out unnoticed? If the player decides to stay and listen, they would see Cekos leaning in closer to Thandi, his breath heavy with the scent of alcohol and rage. "You expect me to believe that?" he spits out. Thandi's eyes narrow, and she takes a step back. "You've been gone for months, Cekos," she says, her voice rising. "Do you think I've just been waiting for you? Alone?" The villagers exchange uneasy glances, the whispers growing louder. Cekos's face contorts in anger. "You're my wife." He slams the beer bottle onto the counter, shattering it into 100 pieces. "You belong to me." Thandi, undeterred, steps back again, the shards of glass crunching under her feet. "And what have you given me, Cekos?" she challenges, her eyes flashing. absence and suspicion? Is that all I'm worth to you? The player, caught in the crossfire of their argument, feels a twinge of pity for Thandi. Yet, they also understand the weight of Mithokosi's accusations in a culture where marriage is sacred. The villagers shift uncomfortably, some looking away, others nodding in silent agreement with Mithokosi. Thandi's voice, now laced with a hint of desperation, cuts through the tension. "I've given you my heart, my body, and my life," she says, her chin held high. "But I am not your property to be owned and controlled. I am a woman with feelings and desires, and if those desires led me elsewhere while you were gone, then perhaps it's you who should be questioning your worth, not me." Mithokosi's face reddens with fury. He grabs Thandi's wrist, his grip like a vice. "You will tell me who he is," he demands, pulling her closer. "I will not be made a fool of in my own village." Thandi tries to jerk free, her eyes darting around the room. The player notices the fear in them, but also a spark of defiance. She turns to the villagers, her voice strong and clear. "Let him go," she says, her eyes pleading. "This is between us." The player feels the weight of the situation, the room now a tinderbox ready to ignite. They consider their options. Should they intervene to prevent potential violence, or respect the couple's privacy and leave them to their tumultuous dance of accusation and counter-accusation? The player opts to stand firm, deciding that their presence might serve as a deterrent to any escalation. "Mithokosi," the player interjects calmly, placing a gentle hand on the man's shoulder. "Let's not let this get out of hand." Mithokosi's eyes, still blazing with anger, briefly meet the players. He considers the intervention for a moment before releasing Thandi's wrist with a dismissive snarl. "This doesn't concern you, outsider," he says, turning away to face the villagers, his pride wounded. Thandi, visibly relieved, smooths her dress and takes a deep breath. "Thank you," she murmurs to the player, her voice a whisper. "I can handle this." The player nods, keeping a watchful eye on the situation as they move back slightly, allowing the couple some space. The villagers, now fully engrossed in the drama, murmur their approval at the player's discretion. Mithokosi turns back to Thandi, his fists clenched at his sides. "Fine," he says, his voice tight with restrained anger. "But know this. I will find out who he is, and when I do, there will be consequences." Thandi's eyes harden, and she steps up to her husband, standing toe-to-toe with him. "If you truly believe that I've been unfaithful," she says, her voice steady, "then you must face the fact that our love is not as strong as you thought it was. Perhaps it's time we both move on." The words hang in the air like the thunderheads outside, pregnant with the promise of a tempestuous downpour. The villagers' murmurs rise to a crescendo, their shock and dismay at Thandi's boldness clear. Mithokosi's jaw clenches, and for a moment, the player thinks he might strike her. But instead, he turns and storms out of the shebeen, the door slamming shut behind him, leaving a void of silence in his wake. The player glances around the room, noticing the villagers' wide eyes and gaping mouths. Thandi, now visibly shaking, sinks onto a stool, her hand still pressed to her wrist where Mthokosi had held her. The shebeen's owner, a stoic woman named Mantombi, approaches, placing a comforting hand on Thandi's shoulder. "Let me get you some water," she says gently, disappearing into the back room. Thandi looks up, meeting the player's gaze with a mix of gratitude and desperation. "Thank you," she says again, her voice trembling. "I didn't know what he might do." The player nods solemnly. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Thandi shakes her head, a solitary tear tracing a path down her cheek. "No," she whispers. "This is just the beginning." Mantombi returns with a cup of water, setting it down in front of Thandi with a heavy sigh. "You're going to have to tell him, my dear," she says, her voice filled with a motherly concern. "The truth will eat away at you if you keep it inside." Thandi looks up at the player, her eyes searching. "Do you think that's what I should do?" she asks, her voice barely above a murmur. The player considers her question carefully, aware of the gravity of the situation. "I can't tell you what to do," they reply, "but I do know that secrets have a way of festering and causing more harm than good." Thandi nods slowly, taking a shaky sip of water. "I know," she says, her eyes lingering on the shattered glass at her feet. "But the truth, it's not simple." Montombi's expression softens as she pats Thandi's shoulder. "I understand," she says, her voice soothing, "but you must find a way to mend this. The village won't tolerate such discord for long." She glances around the shebeen, where the villagers are slowly returning to their drinks and conversations, though the undercurrent of gossip is palpable. The player remains by Thandi's side, sensing her vulnerability. "If you need someone to talk to," they offer, "I'm here." Thandi's gaze lingers on them, and she seems to weigh her words before speaking. "The truth is," she begins, her voice dropping to a whisper, "I did find comfort in another man's arms while Mthakazi was away." The player nods, allowing her to continue without judgment. "But it wasn't just any man," she confesses. "It was someone I never expected to love." Montombi's eyebrows shoot up, and she leans in closer, her curiosity piqued. "Who could it be?" she asks, her voice hushed. Thandi takes a deep breath, her gaze flickering over to the player before returning to the concerned face of the shebeen owner. "It's complicated," she says, "but he's not from here. He's a traveler, a man who understands what it's like to be lost in the world." Montombi's expression remains neutral, but the player can see the curiosity burning in her eyes. She pours Thandi another cup of water, her movements deliberate and careful. "Well, whoever he is, you'd best be careful, my girl," she says, her voice a mix of caution and empathy. Mthakazi is a proud man, and his pride can be a dangerous thing. The player nods in silent agreement, watching as Thandi's shoulders slump. She looks up, her eyes meeting the player's, and for a brief moment, the weight of her secret seems to lift. "I know," she says, her voice a weary sigh, "but I can't help how I feel, and I can't live a lie." Montombi's gaze flits between Thandi and the player, and she seems to make a decision. "Why don't you both come to my place tonight?" she suggests. "We can talk more freely there, away from the prying eyes and wagging tongues of this place." Thandi looks up at the player, hope flickering in her eyes. "Would you come with me?" she asks, her voice shaky. The player nods, feeling a responsibility to support her in her time of need. "Of course," the player replies firmly, "but we should be careful. The village won't stay silent for long." Montombi nods in agreement. "You're right," she says. "The storm outside is nothing compared to the one brewing in here." She wipes the counter down with a damp cloth, her eyes never leaving Thandi's. "We'll meet at my place after the moon rises. It's the last hut on the left as you leave the village." Thandi nods gratefully, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. The player finishes their drink and offers a comforting smile. "We'll be there," they assure her. "And remember, you're not alone." As the evening shifts into night, the player and Thandi make their way through the quiet village, the air thick with the anticipation of the storm. The thatched rooftops are silhouetted against the starlit sky, and the distant rumble of thunder is a constant reminder of the tumultuous emotions churning within Thandi's heart. The player notices her hesitation as they approach Montombi's hut. the flickering light from the oil lamp within casting shadows that dance on the packed earth outside. "Are you sure about this?" the player asks gently. Thandi takes a deep breath, her hand briefly touching the player's arm. "Yes," she whispers. "I need to tell someone. Maybe together we can figure out what to do." Mantombi's hut is simple but warm, the fire in the center casting a comforting glow on the earthen walls. She motions for them to sit on the woven mats that serve as seating, her expression a blend of concern and curiosity. As the rain starts to patter against the roof, she pours a cup of steaming rooibos tea for each of them, the sweet scent of honeybush wafting through the room. "Now, tell me everything," Mantombi urges, her voice gentle but firm. Thandi takes a sip of her tea, her hand shaking slightly. "His name is Tendai," she begins, her eyes downcast. "He's a Zimbabwean migrant worker, passing through the village. We met at the market when he offered to help me carry my supplies home. He was kind, and he made me laugh." She pauses, her voice thick with emotion. "He's been staying in a hut on the outskirts, working odd jobs for anyone who will hire him. One night, when the rain was particularly bad, I found him soaked to the bone. I couldn't bear to see him suffer, so I offered him shelter. That's when things changed between us." Mantombi nods solemnly, her eyes never leaving Thandi's face. "And does he know the situation here?" Thandi shakes her head, the rain outside growing louder as the storm begins in earnest. "He knows I'm married, but not everything. I didn't want to burden him with my troubles. He's already got his own share to deal with, being so far from home." Mantombi sighs, her expression a blend of sadness and understanding. "Life is not always kind, my child," she says, her eyes filled with a wisdom that comes from years of witnessing the joys and heartaches of village life. "But you must be honest with yourself and with those who care for you. Secrets have a way of festering." Thandi nods, her eyes brimming with tears. "I know," she whispers, "but what can I do? If Mthokozi finds out about Tendai?" Mantombi's gaze is steady. "You must tell him, Thandi. It's the only way to face this head on." The player nods in agreement. Mantombi's right, but maybe there's a way to do it without causing too much harm. Perhaps if you speak to Mthokozi when he's calmer, explain your feelings, and maybe he'll understand. Thandi looks up, her eyes searching the player's face for a glimmer of hope. "Do you think so?" she asks, her voice small. The player nods, trying to sound more confident than they feel. "It's worth a try," they say, "but you must choose your words carefully, and remember, no matter what happens, we're here for you." Mantombi's expression is stern. "This isn't a decision to be taken lightly, Thandi. If you tell Mthokozi, there will be consequences. But the longer you keep this secret, the more it will eat away at you and at the fabric of your marriage." Thandi sniffs, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I know," she says, her voice trembling. "But what if he doesn't understand? What if he hurts Tendai?" Mantombi's expression softens, and she places a comforting hand on Thandi's shoulder. "Then we will stand by you," she says firmly. "We will not allow harm to come to you or your lover." The player nods in agreement, feeling the gravity of the situation. "But we must be strategic," they add. "We can't just confront Mthokozi without a plan." Mantombi strokes her chin thoughtfully. "You're right," she says. "Perhaps we should seek the counsel of the village elder, Gogo Zondi. She has seen much in her years and might offer us guidance." Thandi looks up, hope flickering in her eyes. "Do you think she could help?" Mantombi nods. "Gogo Zondi is wise and she cares for this village. She'll listen and offer counsel that's best for everyone involved." The player, feeling the weight of the situation, decides to take the initiative. Thandi, why don't we wait for the storm to pass before we go to Gogo Zondi? They suggest gently. It's not safe to go out in this weather, and we should all think clearly before we speak to anyone. Thandi nods, visibly relieved by the suggestion of delay. Thank you, she murmurs, taking another sip of tea. I need some time to think. Mantombi nods sympathetically. Take all the time you need, my dear. But remember, the storms of the heart are often more dangerous than those from the sky. She stands and places a hand on Thandi's shoulder, giving it a comforting squeeze. Rest now, and when the rain stops, we'll speak with Gogo Zondi. The player and Thandi spend the next few hours huddled by the fire, listening to the rain lash on against the walls of the hut. The conversation turns to lighter topics, a welcome reprieve from the tension that hangs in the air. They share stories of their lives, their hopes, and their dreams, forging a bond that feels stronger than mere friendship. As the storm begins to abate, Mantombi stands, stretching her stiff limbs. The rain is letting up, she says, peering out the doorway. It's time we go to Gogo Zondi. Thandi nods, though the dread is clear in her eyes. Thank you, she murmurs to the player. I don't know if I could do this alone. The player squeezes her hand reassuringly. You're not alone, they say. We're in this together. Mantombi nods. Come, she says, her voice firm but kind. We'll face this as a community. The player and Thandi follow Mantombi through the now drizzling rain, their footsteps squelching in the mud. The village seems eerily quiet, the storm having sent everyone to the safety of their huts. The flickering lights from the windows cast shadows that dance in the puddles. They arrive at the home of Gogo Zondi, a larger, more elaborate hut at the center of the village. The walls are adorned with intricate carvings, and a warm glow emanates from within. The rain has subsided to a gentle patter, a soft lullaby for the night's drama. Mantombi raps softly on the door, and after a moment, it creaks open to reveal the village elder, her eyes gleaming in the candlelight. Mantombi, she greets, her voice a croaky whisper. What brings you to my door at this late hour? Mantombi steps aside, allowing Thandi and the player to enter the hut. The space is cluttered with various artifacts and herbs, the air thick with the scent of incense. Gogo Zondi's eyes, sharp despite her age, sweep over them both. Come, she beckons, gesturing to the low stools surrounding the fire. Sit and tell me what troubles your hearts. Thandi takes a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she sits. Gogo, she begins, her voice barely above a whisper. I have done something I am not proud of. I have been unfaithful to my husband, Mthokozi. Gogo Zondi's expression remains neutral, her eyes never leaving Thandi's. She nods slowly. I see, she says, her voice as ancient as the village itself. And who is this man who has captured your heart? Thandi swallows hard, glancing at the player before speaking. His name is Tendai, she confesses. He's a migrant worker from Zimbabwe. He's kind, and he makes me feel alive. Gogo Zondi nods, her expression unreadable. She stirs the embers in the fire with a gnarled stick, the light casting eerie shadows on her face. And where is this Tendai now? Thandi's voice quivers. He's still here, in the village. He doesn't know that Mthokozi has returned. Gogo Zondi's eyes narrow, her gaze piercing through Thandi's fear. This is a delicate matter, child, she says, her tone measured. Both your husband's pride and your own heart are at stake. You must choose your words carefully, for once they leave your lips, they cannot be recalled. Thandi nods, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I know, she whispers, but I can't live like this anymore. Gogo Zondi studies her for a long moment before speaking. "The path you walk is fraught with danger, Thandi," she says gravely. "But if your love for this man is true, then you must face the consequences of your actions. But do so with honor, and perhaps there is a chance for healing." Thandi nods, her resolve strengthening with each word from the wise elder. "I will tell Mthokasi the truth," she says, her voice wavering, "and I will accept whatever comes of it." Mantombi nods in approval. "That's the spirit," she says. "But remember, the truth can cut like a knife. You must handle it with care." The player, feeling the gravity of the situation, decides to add their voice to the council. Gogo Zondi is right. We must tread carefully and think of the best way to reveal this to Mthokasi. Gogo Zondi nods, her eyes still fixed on Thandi. "You must be prepared for his anger," she warns, "and for the whispers that will follow. But if your love is true, it can withstand the storm." Mantombi puts a comforting arm around Thandi's shoulders. "We'll be with you," she says. "We won't let him harm you." Thandi nods, taking strength from the solidarity offered by Mantombi and the player. "Thank you," she says, her voice barely audible. Gogo Zondi, sensing the gravity of the moment, stands up with a grace that belies her age. "Tomorrow," she declares, "you will come to me after the morning meal. We will perform a ceremony to cleanse your heart and prepare you for the storm that awaits." Thandi nods, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you, Gogo," she whispers. Mantombi stands as well, her hand on the player's shoulder. "We'll be here," she says firmly. "We'll face this together." The player nods, feeling the weight of their newfound responsibility to Thandi. "We'll support you through this," they affirm, their voice a beacon of stability in the tempestuous sea of Thandi's emotions. Mantombi stands, signaling the end of the meeting. "Rest now, Thandi," she says gently. "Tomorrow is a new day, and with it comes new challenges. We must face them with clear eyes and full hearts." The next day, after the cleansing ceremony with Gogo Zondi, the player arranges a meeting with both Thandi and Mthokasi in a neutral location, a clearing in the nearby woods. The tension is palpable as the three of them sit around a small fire, the smell of damp earth and wet leaves mixing with the incense from the ceremony. Thandi, with Mantombi's support, confesses her infidelity to Mthokasi, her voice trembling but earnest. Mthokasi's face is a mask of anger and pain, his fists clenching and unclenching rhythmically. The player, acting as mediator, carefully presents the situation, emphasizing the depth of Thandi's regret and the potential for healing. They encourage Mthokasi to listen, to understand the reasons behind her actions, and to consider the possibility of forgiveness. Mthokasi, though initially enraged, slowly lets the storm within him abate as the player speaks. His eyes, which had been boring into Thandi with accusation, soften slightly, and he takes a deep, shuddering breath. "Why?" he asks, his voice raw. Thandi looks up at him, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I was lonely," she admits. "You were gone for so long, and I didn't know if you were coming back." Mthokasi's expression tightens, the words striking him like a physical blow. "Is that all?" he asks, his voice tight with barely contained anger. "Was I not enough for you?" The player steps in, their voice calm and measured. "It's not about what you did or didn't do," they explain. "It's about how Thandi felt and what she needed in your absence. We're all human, and sometimes we make mistakes." Mthokasi's gaze shifts to the player, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and confusion. "And what about you?" he asks, his tone accusatory. "What's your role in all of this?" The player holds his gaze, their voice calm and steady. My role is to help Thandi and you find a path through this, they explain. I've seen the pain that secrets and lies can cause, and I believe that by facing the truth, you can find a way to heal and move forward. Mthikozi, after a moment of contemplative silence, nods his head, the tension in his body visibly decreasing. His expression shifts from anger to one of understanding, though the pain is still evident in his eyes. I forgive you, he says gruffly, his voice thick with emotion. He reaches out and takes Thandi's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. Thandi's shoulders drop in relief, and she whispers her promise to never betray him again. The player notices a palpable shift in the atmosphere, the air feeling less charged with the potential for violence and more with the possibility of reconciliation. Montombi, who had been quietly observing the exchange, steps forward and places a hand on each of their shoulders. The past is the past, she says, her voice firm but filled with warmth. What's important now is that you both learn from this and work together to build a future filled with trust and love. They both started to live happily, and Mthikozi never judged her and tried to forget her past. Thank you so much for listening to the story. We need to understand our partner and try our level best to spend time with her. Share this story with your loved ones.